Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Penny and Kelly show. See whose name got to go first there because I was talking. Penny and Kelly show.
I think we could start over.
We could just hit stop. And but it is the last day of the week, and I can't imagine a better way to jump into the weekend than the thinking we're going to do today with Chris Reed from Auckland, New Zealand, who has such a better, cool accent than anybody in this country. Thank you very much. I love listening to you talk. But a high school teacher from New Zealand who contacted me through LinkedIn about his work with 180 Days. And we just thought that it would be really interesting to talk with someone who's in the midst of the work in a big high school and kind of the pluses and the minuses and what's happening. So Kelly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just, this idea. Well, first of all, I think I'm right here, Chris, right? Your weekend's already started, right?
That's right.
You're in New Zealand. It's already Saturday.
The future is bright.
I've never been to New Zealand. I've never been in the school. So I'm just very curious of how our work translates on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question. And can I jump in there, Penny? Do you mind?
Please, yes.
So we've got a bit of an interesting setup in New Zealand. It is quite different to America. We go from year 1 to year 13, and there's kind of 3 phases that we've got, which is primary, which goes from year 1 to year 6, or when you're about 10-ish. Then we have a break, which is year called intermediate, which is year 7 and 8 only, and then you go to high school, which is where I am based, which is year 9 to 13. And so we've got a couple of national bodies. We've got our Ministry of Education, which looks after everything from the teaching to the building to all the administration. And then we've got the National Qualifications Authority, which deals with the big picture in terms of the way we assess. Interestingly, we only have assessments in year 11, 12, and 13 on a national scale. So that's a little bit different to you guys, and the dreaded multi-choice questions that come up and time again and many of the podcasts and books that I read. We don't have them in New Zealand. They're not a compulsory part of our syllabus, but I can see they're on the horizon as our PISA scores are dropping, and so there's a big national concern that we are losing the ability to read and write in this country. So that's sort of our big picture premise as to where we are in the world. But we've got a different style in terms of how we operate, and hopefully we'll dig into that over the course of today, and how I'm trying to change that in my school, at least. And my school is Maclean's College. I'm in Auckland, and we've got a beautiful outlet look onto the Waitemata Harbour, and I don't know if you follow the America's Cup at all over there, but that was a lot of the racing in New Zealand was just off our peninsula, so it was pretty awesome to watch that happening.
Wow, it sounds lovely. How about some practical things? How many kids in a class?
So we've got 2,900 kids overall, and in a class you're ranging from 28 to 35.
Yeah, big classes.
Yeah, they are trying to drop them, but it's an ongoing factor of trying to find teachers, trying to find money, and it's just I'm sure you have the same problems over there.
So
how does the work in 180 days translate, and what have you done with that, and maybe how have you modified that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think probably the story that comes into, I sort of need to go back a couple of steps, if you don't mind. So I stepped out of teaching for a couple of years, and during that time when I was in consultancy and working with a range of industries, and as part of that job, it became really clear to me that the work that I had been doing as an English teacher wasn't translating into later life reading, and that to me was a real sadness. That all of my colleagues didn't read, they didn't go to the theatre, they didn't read poetry, they didn't get stuck into anything outside of their jobs. It was very much a leaving that behind. So when I came back to teaching, I realized that I had to change something in my own practice in order to not have that short horizon of being the assessment at the end of the year, but actually in 25 years' time, I want them to be going to a Shakespeare play or reading another novel, or and a novel that's a bit more meaty than, say, the latest Dan Brown thriller, which is fine, but let's go a bit further on. And so I started looking for things out there, and a couple of names kept popping up, which was your two names. And so it's very hard to get hold of academic books in New Zealand other than through eBay. So I had to go through eBay to get 180 Days, and it just resonated from the start for me. And I guess the first thing that's really this one here, this chart here. I don't know if you can see that one. That one was an absolute game changer for me, to think that what can I do in my own classroom to shift the practice of my students? And we tend to prioritize silent reading through library sessions or reading at the start of the lesson, but we didn't do anything with that. And so often I found that the teachers that I was in contact with would be marking or doing some admin or doing something that was not reading. And it came back to that comment that you make about modeling. How my students seeing me operate in those times? And if I'm not reading, what am I saying to them? That it's not important, that I don't need to do this, or etc., etc. And so that was the first change that I had to make, is to make sure that my students saw me reading as often as I possibly could. And so I walk around school with books now constantly. I'm the book guy. If you ever look for Mr. Reed, he's the one who's carrying books around. So that in itself became part and parcel of my own persona. Then I moved into getting my own classroom library, and I started going just to, we call them op shops here, but you might call them thrift stores. Is that correct?
Correct.
So thrift stores, and going to book fairs where you can pick up a book for $1, and just filling my classroom with books that I liked initially. And things that I found interesting, like To Kill a Mockingbird, all the classics that I thought that kids would want to read. And that the old experience is what you get after you need it. That those kids weren't ready for those books, so I needed to go and do some more hunting and finding out more. And that's when it sort of clicked on me that my students are coming to me in year 9, which is about 13, where they're reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid still, and I need to get them over the course of 3 years to the Pride and Prejudice of the world. And if I'm not reading what they're reading, then I'm never ever going to be able to take them on a journey to where they need to be in 3-4 years time, when they're doing these assessments that really matter. So I had to look at what sorry.
No, I want to stop for a minute, because you've covered so much territory in a short amount of time, right? And
yeah, well, I have to maximize my time,
That's right. I mean, no, but what I appreciate that you said is, I don't know about Kelly's experience. I don't think we ever talked about this, but when I started at the high school and I had seniors and I realized they're not reading, I brought my library in, which was all British literature from my master's degree program. And it was the same exact thing. Like, none of you want to read Jane Eyre? Like, what? And, and I just couldn't, because I had such a passion for that program. And I thought, I have no idea what they will read, because they had clearly not been reading for years. And I think that there are teachers right now who feel that. Like, I've had teachers in workshops I've done say, I am not giving up what I love to read, which is serial killers and murder mysteries. And I'm not bringing that into my middle school. So I think we have librarians. Do you have a librarian where you are?
Yes, we do. Yes.
We have them in my district, but in many places I go, they don't even have librarians anymore. And so we are forced to find other places to find books. So how did you figure out what your kids would read?
Wow, that's an ongoing process, and I'm still learning, and I'm still working through things. But again, from 180 days, I gave them a blank sheet of paper to my class and said, what do you want? What is it that you are reading? Tell me 3 books that you've read that you love. And from that, I learned 2 things. I learned, first of all, that the kids are not reading enough. And I learned that there's a whole lot of books out there that I've never heard of, and things that I needed to get stuck into. You know, the things like the Gone series, which up until that point I'd never read, because I was an adult and I wasn't of that era. And so I needed to go hunting, and went into Goodreads, and Goodreads has become my best friend, because I can look at all the links that are available, and all of the lists that are on there, and I read reviews. And now if I know a student is going to conference with me the next day and they're reading a book that I don't know, and I don't have time to skim read it, so I'll just go onto Goodreads and get a general idea of what that book's about, and then talk to them about it in my conference the next day. So I need to make sure that I'm aware where each of those students are at, and shift that practice as fast as I can, so that they are progressing. I know that Nancy Atwell talks a lot about that idea of vacation reading, and we call it bubblegum reading. You know, that it's that nutritionally pretty low, but fun to do. And then we've got each of my students have got building on Jim Collins' work, you know, the BHAG or the big, hairy, audacious goal. What is each student's big, hairy, audacious goal for this year? What's the book that they've always wanted to read but never read? And I've got one. Mine is Ulysses. I've never read it, but I want to read it. And it's so I'm in there with them, and we have a thing in class where whenever someone finishes a book within that 15 minutes, there's always an applause, just to say, hey, this is awesome, well done, you're another one down. So we're celebrating reading, we're getting stuck in, and it's starting to do that in my class, and then it sort of spreads out to the other teams when teachers ask me, you know, why were you guys clapping? You know, why are you clapping every second day? You know, what's going on? And then you build a culture. And now, that was a couple of years ago, and now we've been able to shape it so that it's become common practice across our 550 kids in year 9, and same in year 10. So it's an exciting time at school.
That is awesome. You know what? There's a new word. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kelly.
I just like the idea, you know, it comes back to how Penny has phrased it many times. If they're not reading with you, they're not reading without you.
Yeah.
Right? And there's just so much fake reading going on. And I think sometimes we're so concerned about teaching all the reading standards and making sure kids know how to summarize and making sure this and that, but they're not reading. They don't go home and read. They don't read outside the walls of the school. And so that volume issue, if that doesn't get solved, right? And what I'm hearing, Chris, from you is a word that sort of resonated, I think, through 180 days, and that's the word responsive. Like, you're not teaching stuff, you're teaching kids. And you just said your job is to try to find out where each kid is. And I think that's a very different approach than it's done in a lot of traditional classrooms.
Well, and the other piece that I thought was really interesting you said was when you brought up vacation reads. And Kelly has already read this, and I had just finished it this weekend, but The Reading Mind, Daniel Willingham, that we've both been looking at, he calls it leisure reading. And he makes this distinction that leisure reading is when you have a lot of other options of things you can do with your time and you're choosing to read. And that is heavily dependent on motivation. Right? It is dependent on your environment. So if you're limiting the other choices that are out there by screen time or whatever as a parent, that can have an impact on it, but it is primarily motivated. He was looking at who on the plane is reading while I'm reading. And I'm sure you've done this. I've done this. There's no one in my near vicinity reading ever. And those of us who are, why did we make the choice to use our leisure time for reading a book? And I love that you noticed that not only in your staff, other people that you teach with, but you noticed it in kids. And as I was reading this, because he talks about this really important impact it has on us, the volume that we read. And we've said this forever, but that is the first piece that struck me, is these kids that had stopped reading, who were just skimming to get by in class. It was like they were stuck in place. Like, how are they going to progress if you aren't ever practicing reading? So I am, I gotta say, what is it? New Zealand has always felt more sophisticated to me than where I live. What is that? Is it the beautiful mountains? Is it the, I don't know. I read so many books from there because it's like one of those dream things on my bucket list. But I guess I thought that you guys would have all this stuff figured out. And it sounds
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And you think that, but I think, you know, we're still a little country at the edge of the world, and for the longest time we have been a colony of Britain, and so that is changing, and we are moving away from that and finding our own independence. But I think that we have got a lot of those hangovers still sitting with us as a little, as I say, little island. And while it's important that we are growing and learning constantly, you know, we're also looking backwards at our own history, and we've got the indigenous people of the Māori people here, and there's a big shift in New Zealand back towards bringing their knowledge to the fore, and how we can connect with that side of who we are as a nation. And they're a big metaphoric oral language tradition, and so there's a richness of imagery coming through there too. And a lot of our New Zealand Māori writers are coming through with this beautiful poetry, stories and narrative poems, and just general novels, and that storytelling approach that is just changing our literary landscape in a big way too. So it's an exciting time.
It strikes me the universality of this conversation. Like, you're on the other side of the world with the exact same reading issues, the exact same reading problems. You know, there's a movement in this country that's being resisted in a lot of places of giving voice to people who have traditionally been voiceless. I don't know, it just seems so universal to me.
I'm wondering too, right before we started this, filming this, we were talking about the results that you're seeing, and I really want to hear about that. But I first want to ask you about, as an English teacher, when kids aren't reading, what's the impact on their writing that you've noticed in your career?
Wow. Yeah, I'm so pleased you brought that up, because writing is my passion at the moment. I kind of feel like I've got a handle on reading and what I want to do, and I've got a vision of how I want that to happen. And now my writing side is the key for me and my staff at school. And I personally became a writer during the pandemic. I was never a writer, and I began my own journey, and I've been very grateful to get a few awards and be placed in a couple of national competitions here. And so that struck a whole new love for writing in me. And again, it came to a realization that my students were doing one piece of creative writing a year, which was an assessment, and about 5 or 6 essays, where all that was changing between one essay assessment to the next was the content that was going to go in the essay, not the crafting of the essay. And so I had to step back from that situation and go, how on earth am I going to teach my students to love writing? And how am I going to get them to realize that writing is more than essays? But it's also important that I teach them how to craft beautiful essays. And the joy of creation has to come in parallel with the joy of reading. We work very closely with our local iwi, which is our tribe in Māori, and they talk a lot about this idea of mahu tukutuku, which is a tukutuku is like a design that goes onto the wall. It's made with flax, and the design tells the story of that particular marae. And you need to have 2 people to do a tukutuku panel. And so the belief is that for every piece of writing that you do, and for every bit of reading that you do, there is always 2 people, and that through that connection of 2 people working together, you get something beautiful that tells a story. And so that's the way that we explain it to our students. And it's the same with an essay, it's the same with a piece of nonfiction, it's the same with a narrative. There is a journey that each person has to go on to create something beautiful. So in my own writing, I've brought in, again, from 180 days, there's every day my students write for 15 minutes at the start of the class after my mini lesson. And it suddenly dawned on me that this was how I was learning music when I was at school. And that I was told when I was at school that the way that I was being taught the piano was the same way that Beethoven was taught the piano, and that there was these little sections and episodes that happen in every lesson, and you begin with your theory, then you do your scales, then you do your a piece you've written for a while, then you introduce a new piece of music, and so on and so forth. And it was the same routine each day. And I started to see the similarities coming through with my own structure of class, and how I was able to build up all of these bits and pieces, so that by the end of the year, there was this rich, beautiful tuku panel that was being created for my students. And it's been awesome. And you can call it fancy names like interleaving and spaced learning and all those sorts of things that come from the literature. But really, it's about giving students the time to create and to enjoy reading and writing. So I don't think I've really answered your question well there. I went on a bit of a tangent, I'm sorry. But I think that coming back to the idea that writing is the partner, the marriage partner of reading. And so being able to teach my students through mentor texts and through little daily exercises. And I think, you mentioned Dan Willingham before. I think he talks a lot about that you need to give students an extra 20% time to practice in each class than what we currently do. That's what I'm looking to do. I'm trying to give my students the space and the time and get rid of the noise of some of those traditional content aspects, and give them some opportunity just to create and be themselves through the writing and reading that they do.
That's beautiful. My favorite phrase, the joy in creativity has to come in parallel with the joy of reading. Nicely said.
Are you held to a lot of like state sponsored standards?
No, not until year 11. And that's when we have a couple of choices in terms of what students can do. We have the Cambridge curriculum in some schools here. We have the IB curriculum in some schools, or there's the national system, which is referred to as NCEA. And that's where you have a national ranking or expectation. But up until that point, it's kind of up to the individual school. There are opportunities to do sort of mandated testing, and I know that's a strange thing to say, there's an opportunity to do mandated testing, but there's I use mandated in terms of like a general nationwide. There are tests available to us, and some schools choose to do it, and some schools don't, and that's through reading, writing, and maths. And there are some shifts in that, and in fact, as part of my process, I have chosen to add in a couple of those reading comprehension tests, just to track and see how it's going. And so going back to that results before, Penny, we've seen a huge shift in the way that our students are responding to that. But no teacher sees the test before it happens. It's completely thrown onto students. We don't teach to it. We don't talk about it. It's not discussed. It's just, hey, by the way, guys, we're going to do this today. And you've got 40 minutes just to have a crack at these questions. Do your best, but no stress either way, because it's not going to be reported on a national scale. It's just to say, hey, look, how are we tracking? So that's been an interesting move. I don't think I'll keep it long term, but it's been interesting to see how it's developed. But I think more as the intangible benefits when I walk around the school now, and we've got a campus that's about 1 kilometre wide, maybe less. I don't know exactly how long it is, but I don't know what that is in miles. Sorry, but must be about half. I don't know.
What is it? 1.6
6 tenths of a mile.
Yeah. But I was walking through the school in the last week of last term, and just I was overwhelmed by just the number of students at lunchtime who were just sitting reading, some of them in groups, some of them just by themselves. And so I was walking around and asking students, what are you reading? And every single student I spoke to had a book to show me in their bag and say, hey, here's the book that I'm currently going through. And they were able to answer questions on it. And that's something that I can never put a value on. But empirically speaking, we've also had an increase in the number of books being taken out of our school library. I know that from my book talks that I do every day at the start of the lesson, I've given away 100 of my own books and to students in my classes, and I've said, or sometimes it's just a, hey, Johnny, I think you should read this book, and sometimes it's anybody want it, hands up. And it's been, so those are the things that have been celebratory for me this year. And it's not, the results are great, but it's more that intangible that I'm more enjoying.
I'm wondering how that your change of practice, I'm wondering how that was or was not accepted by the other people in your department.
Yeah. So I came back into the classroom 4 years ago, and I, funnily enough, had just read G.K. Chesterton's story, which includes the Great Chesterton's Fence, which is, the idea of there's a fence, and for those people who don't know, there's a fence between two neighbors, I think it was from memory, and one says, I want to take that fence down. The other says, well, you can only take it down once you know what the purpose of it was for. So I had to step back and look at what was the purpose of what we were currently doing. How were my students currently getting towards their end of year process? And I should probably acknowledge now that we have about a 50% attrition rate of students between our year 12 and year 13. Year 12 is mandated English, year 13 is optional, and we lose 50% of our cohort, which is a massive problem in my mind. So that was my first port of call, saying what's going on there. And then working backwards, I had to establish why was that the case, and then communicate that. So I gave a year where I was just going to each individual staff member and just talking through, saying, what do you think the problem is? Why is this happening? What can we do to make this better? And through those connections, we sort of shaped some of the course that we've got now. And so I had to bring everybody on board with me. And it's quite a stretch when I bring new people into the school, even now, who are seasoned professionals and they've taught for 35 years, and they'll say, but I've always taught this at year 9, or I've always done that at year 10, and say, well, sorry, you don't at our school. That's just become part of what we do, is to focus on what is important to our students, and that's reading and writing. And it's pretty simple. It's hard to argue against when you break it down to that. So I go and talk to my staff regularly. I explain to them the why, that great Simon Sinek, they'll explain the why, and bring it back to that, the practice before the theory. So showing what I do in my class, inviting staff to come and watch me teach, and saying, this is how I do it. I'm not saying that mine is the perfect, but it's certainly I'm on the road. And if you've got any questions at any time, come and speak to me. Don't complain. Come and speak to me. Let's talk about it and find a way to get through it together. And sometimes that means a bit of a tailoring of individual courses, but on the whole, it's been a successful journey where we've got all 28 English staff now doing this 15 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of writing.
Wow.
Which is reflected in all those kids sitting out with books.
Yeah.
Out in the quad.
That's right. Yeah. It's a feeling. It's a feeling of change for sure.
Have you at all asked kids if it matters to them the way things have changed?
Not in those direct words, but at the end of the year, again, there's that great reflection sheet that you've got in 180 days, which I changed to deliver to the students and to ask them about their journey and in the first pilot year that was last year, and how did they feel it had gone. And universally, there was an increase in their volume. universally there was an increase in their engagement with the text. Both, and I talk about engagement not just as a positive thing, because I think we get hung up on, to engage with a text you've got to love it. Well, actually you can engage with a text and hate it, and I think that's just as effective. And if a student stops, I want to know, what did you hate about it? Tell me what really riled you up so much that you had to stop reading that book, because I think that's as interesting as why did you love it. So that was an interesting thing that came out of that survey. But I think the most notably is I had an experience anecdotally just recently with a student who I thought genuinely had concerns that she may be close to illiterate, because she would avoid reading at the best of times, and there would be the universal looking around the room and how long have I got to go in my 15 minutes. And I sat her down and got her to read out a couple of sections to me, and sure enough she could read fine. She was a young Indian girl, and so I the next day I brought in Q&A, the story of Slumdog Millionaire. And I said, this is a story about a young Indian boy in the slums who goes on to, and she was the first person to put her hand up. 2 days later, she comes back to me and she said, I've finished it. What else have you got? And I said, what did you love about it? And she said, I saw myself in the characters. And that to me was that makeshift or seminal moment of, that's what it's about, giving students this view of themselves in a book that they haven't experienced before. And she's still not a superb reader, but she's on the way. She's learning how to love reading again, and that's what I love about my job.
Well,
Perfect.
it's been a treat to talk to you, Chris. And I don't know about you, Penny, but I'm pretty sure we both feel the same way to hear that book has reached your classroom so far away, and hear the really great things that you're doing was a lot of fun for me.
I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to meet and speak with you guys. I mean, when I reached out to you, Penny, I did not expect a response in any way, shape, or form. It was just, hey, you might be interested to know that this little tiny South Pacific nation has taken on board what you've said. And it's been a joy to meet with you both, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's awesome.
Well, you did mention how hard it is to get professional books from the United States into New Zealand. So I think I speak for Penny when I say that we will personally bring you 4 essential studies as soon as we're invited to come to New Zealand.
Come and stay at our house. You're welcome
There
anytime.
No, thank you so
That's official
much.
now.
I love hearing how people can take something that we conceived of in two very different school districts here in the US and make it work somehow based on the values that you have in your school district and in your population. So it's a thrill. Thank you. And all the best as you finish your school year.
Thank you so much. And same to you. I mean, we've still got 3 terms to go, but you're nearly there. So.
All right. Thank you.
All righty.